So today, as you see in the title here, we're going to be going over choosing the correct HVLP spray system for your needs. Before I get started, everyone, yeah, a little bit more? That's good? Perfect, okay. So is everyone having a good show so far? Yes? Yeah, good stuff, okay. And any Canadians here? Okay, how are you enjoying the heat? Oh my gosh. There you go, that's true, no humidity. Out of curiosity, who in their past has ever used any sort of spray finishing technology, whether it's aerosol or airless or HVLP? Oh boy, okay, we got some seasoned professionals here, that's good to see. And how many people are still using that sort of technology? Okay, good stuff, good stuff. So, purpose of this presentation is really going to be to go over the ins and outs of HVLP technology, whether it's turbine-driven technology or compressor-driven, and what we're going to do is hopefully tailor a system or a particular type of equipment to the needs of you or your shop or even your sales force or any sort of clients you may work with. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over a brief introduction of just myself and what we're looking to cover here. We're going to go over current HVLP technology. So we got the handheld units, we got multi-stage and single-stage turbines, as well as the HVLP compressor spray guns. After that, we're going to go over the anatomy of HVLP technology, so just the ins and outs of the systems, the spray guns, and that sort of thing. After that, we'll go over the pros and cons of each. Now, there are a lot of different offerings on the market today. So one person's pros might be someone else's cons and vice versa. So we can cover all these things as well. After that, we can focus on sort of tailoring it to your needs and the aspects of how the company I work for, how we sort of curtail and tailor these systems to specific people. And then finally, we have a few case studies where we're going to listen to some people that have called in, and they've sort of given their situation or their scenario, and we're going to work together to see which would be the best type of technology for their needs. If time does permit, because I like to give about 15 to 30 minutes at the very end of the presentation just to open it up to conversation and to questions. If we do have some time, we can go over some of the advanced setups that you won't necessarily find them right out of the box. You do have to put a couple pieces together, but we can cover that as well. It's a lot of good information there. So, to start off, who's Jim? My name's Jim Larin. I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm the current sales and operations manager at Fuji Industrial Spray Equipment. We've been in the business for just over 30 years, and we manufacture HVLP turbine-driven technology. What I want to clarify in this presentation is this is not a sales pitch. The only thing I'm trying to get you to do is to go from, if you're using a brush or a roller, to a turbine sprayer. And if you have current spray equipment, regardless of the brand, regardless of the technology, just to make yourself more comfortable using it and to become a better finisher. So that's what we're looking to do today. And what you should plan to take away is, well, exactly what I just said. That's what you're looking to take away from that. So let's get into what HVLP technology is. So, does anyone know what HVLP stands for? Would you like to shout it out? Perfect, okay. So that's exactly it. HVLP technology stands for high volume, low pressure, which means high volumes of air at lower operating pressures. So what this translates to is a softer spray pattern, so you're going to get less bounce back and overspray, and by doing so, you're going to be able to maintain a minimum of 65% transfer efficiency. So what's transfer efficiency? What this is if I were to take a handful of paint and throw it at a wall, whatever sticks to the wall would be, let's say it's 65%, that would be the transfer efficiency, whereas my loss would be around 35. That's what sort of goes up into the atmosphere there. HVLP technology can be found in either some of the inexpensive single-stage units. You can also find it in the turbine-driven units as well as compressor-driven technology. And as I had mentioned, we're going to go over all the different ins and outs of that. So, let's start with some of the handheld units. So typically, the handheld units are more of like an entry-level unit. They may be geared towards more like a DIYer, so a beginner, an amateur, someone who's just getting into spray finishing. So right here would be one of the more inexpensive units that you might see online. And then I also wanted to feature another unit. Now, this would be more higher end and would be considered airless, but this you'll also see on the market too. Great piece of technology. These can range from anywhere from $50 upwards to about $350, depending on what you're looking for in terms of quality, build quality mostly there. So if you're looking at systems like this, what I would try to look for is stainless steel fluid passages or metal fluid passes in general. With plastic components, you know, we all know that they do degrade over time, and when they mix with coatings, especially the solvent-borne materials, you definitely can run into some sealing issues there. Next, we have the single and multi-stage turbine units. So right up here is your single-stage units. You see that you do have a spray gun, and that attaches to a dedicated turbine or air source. Next, you have your two-stage units. So those would typically operate at about 5 psi, where your single-stage units might fall into about 2 to 2.5 psi. And we'll get into what that means a little bit later on in the presentation. Then you would have right around here would be your three-stage unit, but I didn't quite have enough room to fit in the presentation. That would operate at 6.5 psi, typically between 6.5 and 7. Next, you have your four-stage units right there. Those would operate at about between 8 and 9 psi. You have your five-stage offerings here, which are one of the newer offerings, probably in the past, I would say, 5 to 7 years. These operate at 9.5 psi. And what you will see on the market too, which is a great offering for especially the higher viscosity coatings or for a faster speed of application, you'll see six-stage units. And those typically range between about 10 to 11 psi. Next, we have what I'll consider the final offering of HVLP spray technology, which would be running it off of a compressor. You're probably familiar with with high-pressure systems. So that was the older technology. You had really poor transfer efficiency, maybe 30 to 40%, whereas HVLP compressor spray guns must maintain a transfer efficiency of at least 65% to maintain compliancy. Wide range of different types of spray guns here. So you have some of your entry-level units. You'll see these in some of your big box stores. I believe this particular one is a Harbor Freight spray gun. And then you move into some of the higher end or mid-range spray guns as well. Not to deviate too much, we're talking about HVLP technology, but what you'll see in some compressor spray guns now is LVLP, which is low volume, low pressure, and that just draws less CFM. And then you'd also have some of the newer technology, I believe, developed by SATA, which is reduced pressure or mid-pressure technology. That'll maintain still the same great transfer efficiency, but at a higher operating pressure. So if you need to atomize some of the higher viscosity coatings or like high solid clears in the automotive market, that would be an ideal spray gun for what you're looking to do. So let's just quickly go over the anatomy of the different offerings we just talked about so that when we get into some of the pros and cons, we can better understand what we're talking about here. So this specific unit, and it is pretty common with most of these handhelds, is you'll have your air source actually attached to the gun. Now, someone like me who's built like a beanpole or toothpick, that gets a little bit heavy for me. So I'd actually probably hold something like this with two hands. Further to that, because you do have your motor or your air source on the actual spray gun, you notice right here's a spray gun release. What you would do there is you'd click that out, and that'll release this this front component of the spray gun and allow for you to do the cleaning. The reason you want to do that is because you don't want this getting into contact with water. I'm not too familiar. Some systems may have a sealed unit back there, but this particular one I know does not. Next, similar to most spray guns, you will have your air cap, fluid nozzle, needle assembly here. Depending on the size of the fluid nozzle and the size of the air cap will allow you to spray different viscosity finishes. So for instance, if you were doing let's say you were spraying shellac, you might be geared towards maybe a 1.0 millimeter air cap set. If you are looking to spray paints, for instance, or if you're looking to do some of the higher viscosity coatings, 1.5 millimeter to 1.8 millimeter would be a good size for you. Next, we would have the trigger. So obviously self-explanatory. Now, it might be a little bit tough to see because it's blue on blue, but right back there is your fluid control. What that does is it'll restrict the needle from pulling back into the spray gun, or will allow for the needle to pull back further. And what that does is just allow more volume of paint to flow out of the spray gun. So if I was looking to do a lighter spray or some detail work, I'd probably restrict that down nicely, maybe get a little bit closer and just do some touch-ups. If I was looking to really let her open and maybe spray a wall like this, then I'd definitely open up my fluid control there. Finally, we would have the material cup assembly. Simply just holds the volume of material you plan to spray. We always say fill about 3/4 of the way full just to not come in contact with the actual thread of the cup. And finally, we would have our power cord. These units can typically run, I would say, 110 volts. They do have 220 volt varieties for international use as well. And as I'd mentioned before, the air source is actually attached to the spray gun here. That one there? That one is it's an inexpensive import brand. You'll find a multitude of them from China. If you go on Amazon.com, you'll see just absolutely littered with them. Great starter units, but if you are a professional, I would pass.
That looks like a nice throwaway thing to spray the fence.
Yeah. And then the only thing is if you leave too much coating in there, it can turn into a paperweight very, very quickly. So it's something to consider. Next, we can move into the anatomy of the single and multi-stage units. So first, we're going to start with the actual air source here. This is what we would consider an HVLP turbine. There's a multitude of different great brands and different types of turbines on the market, all with great offerings. First thing we're going to look at here is the gun holder. You'll commonly find this on turbine units. What this does, it just allows you to easily store your spray gun after use. Next, you're going to have your air hose. So typically, they're about 25 to 30 feet. With HVLP turbine technology, you'll also typically have a more flexible air hose. Sorry about that, sir. You'll have a more flexible air hose, and that'll allow you to get into some trickier spots, more maneuverability for spraying. It's also a lighter weight hose. It's usually 6 foot in length, so it leaves the heavy part of the air hose on the ground and allows you to really get it to your spraying in a lighter experience there. Next, we have the turbine filters. So this particular model here has 2 filters on either side. They can be either quick change friction fit filters where you're simply just pulling it out of the turbine, or you're going to see some of the more advanced models. They have like a pre and a post filter, and most of the time you will have to use a screw or an Allen key to actually pull those out. You'll see probably more and more of that as turbine-driven technology does evolve. And then finally, we would have the turbine manifold. That's simply just where that air hose is going to connect to. If you are using a turbine with an air hose like this, generally you wouldn't want to keep your turbine on a table here and allow your hose to drop down. The reason for that is turbine-driven technology does generate quite a bit of heat. And so what you're going to do is you're going to really stress out the connection of the hose here, and you may actually end up kinking the hose. So I'd recommend about 1 foot or 2 feet of run before you start angling the hose in any sort of direction there. So that would be the turbine manifold. And hard to see, but on some of the higher-end turbines, like I was mentioning, they have advanced filter technology. You may also notice variable speed controls. What this will allow you to do is dial back the RPM of the motor. On some of the inexpensive units, you can do this using an air control valve in line with the hose. But what that'll do is it's still going to allow that motor to run just as hard as it was trying to, whereas with the variable speed controls, you can just reduce that down. One of the main issues with turbine-driven technology was sound and the amount of heat that was generated by these turbines. They were very, very hot, and they were very, very loud. So some of the newer technology you'll see is a lot of heat dissipation, so getting ways to channel the heat out of the turbine, as well as quiet technology, so deafening the noise of the turbine itself. This is done by reducing the direct sound pass leaving the turbine, and typically what companies will do is they'll reverberate the sound inside of the turbine case before it actually exits out. I believe there's turbines on the market that would range between 60 to 68 decibels at about 20 feet away. So that would be similar to a conversation between two people.
What is the HVLP multi-stage?
That's a great question. So in the previous, just pop back here. So by multi-stage, you got your single stage, and then these I would consider multi-stage units. Now there's also some companies that will combine two turbine motors together in one unit. What that'll deliver is increased PSI, faster speed of application. But to answer your question, multi-stage would just mean additional fan blades on the actual motor. So if you picture like a vacuum motor, a single stage unit would just have one fan, two stage would have two, and that just once again increases the PSI output. Not to deviate too much, when you get into the higher stage systems like the 4s and the 5s, they offer more CFM. Now typically in HVLP technology, in my experience, CFM is a little bit arbitrary. But when you get into these higher stage units, CFM can play a bit of a role because you can actually power two spray guns off of one turbine. You can do this by getting one of the cheaper Home Depot garden hose splitters, and you can actually run two spray guns off of one turbine, which it's nice if you're in a production setting. We've had people put a turbine in the middle of the room, and they, two guys just attack either wall of the inside of the house there. But let's just get back to. Perfect. So now we have the anatomy of an HVLP spray gun. Now this is typical for most spray guns, whether it's LVLP or high pressure. So at the top here, we're going to start from the top. We got your fan pattern control, which is this guy right here. On this particular unit, it is mounted to the side. You will find them also at the rear, and sometimes you'll find them right in there too. What the fan pattern control is going to do is it's going to adjust the size of your fan. So for instance, on this spray gun, if you were to go all the way forward, you'd have a very narrow spray pattern, generally about 1 inch. If you were to open it all the way up, just like the throttle of a motorcycle, it's going to open up to about 13 to 14 inches, depending on the distance you are from your spray piece. Now, with all spraying, we always say about 6 to 8 inches away. So keep that in mind as well. Next, we have our air cap and our fluid nozzle. With your single and multi-stage turbine units, especially when you get into the multi-stage turbine units, you'll have an increased air cap set selection. So what that means, you can spray a wider viscosity of coatings. This particular spray gun would have probably about 7 to 8 different air cap set selections. That is quite common with the higher end HVLP turbine guns. Following that, we have your needle and fluid control, which would be right back here. So the fluid control, similar to the one on the handheld, the tighter it is, or the more it's restricting the needle, the less the needle is going to pull back, the less material is going to come out. The more you open up that control, the more the needle is going to retract, the more fluid comes out. On some spray guns too, they have some really good settings, so it just allows you to easily adjust, whether it's a numbered setting or a dot where you have a reference point. That way you can sort of recreate your spray recipe for future projects. Here we have the trigger, very common. Older style HVLP turbine-driven technology had what's called bleeder-style spray guns. Does anyone have a bleeder spray gun that uses turbine technology? No? So what bleeder spray guns will do is it just allows air to constantly flow out of the turbine. So the second you turn on your turbine, air is going to start coming out of that spray gun. Newer technology uses non-bleed spray guns. These are great because when you set your gun down in the shop and your hose is still connected to the turbine, air is not going to be rushing out of the spray gun, which means you're not going to be kicking up dust in the shop. So that's one thing to consider there. With these triggers, though, for the non-bleeder spray guns, they will have what's called a two-stage trigger. First stage of the trigger will be air, and then the second stage will actually retract the needle and start delivering the fluid to your fluid passages. Following the trigger, we have the air inlet. As you'll see, unlike compressor-driven spray guns, that inlet's pretty big. And the reason for that is because of the high volume, low pressure. Now, with turbine technology, you typically will not see turbines in excess of 10 PSI. So because of that, we need to deliver higher volumes of air through the gun to ensure that we get an effective atomization. And that, once again, delivers that softer spray, so less bounce back, less overspray. If you're using stains, it's not going to push them into the corners as much too. So then after the air inlet, we have our material cup assembly. This is obviously just what holds your material. This particular spray gun, as you can see, is a siphon feed spray gun. Right up here is where you typically have a gravity feed cup or your gravity feed spray gun. Most spray guns are built either siphon or gravity feed, but there are some great offerings on the market that will deliver both. So if you're unsure as to, am I going to enjoy gravity, am I going to enjoy bottom feed, at least this way you could cap off one of the fluid couplers and be able to install a different cup there. Okay, and then on to the compressor-driven spray guns. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to shout them out. Like I said, 15 to 30 minutes at the end of the presentation, we can just sort of crowdsource some information together. So, as we can start here, we got our material cup assembly. This would be your gravity cup. Unlike this guy, who you'll notice got a little bit of a pressure tube here. The reason we need that pressure tube is because we're operating, let's say, at 9.5 psi. We did an adequate amount of air to atomize, but because we're operating at lower pressures, we need to also have enough air to pressurize that cup and push the material to our fluid passages. That'll also be the same with gravity feed spray guns. The pressure tube will come up and pressurize that cup just to ensure you have a constant flow of material to the spray gun. But if we get back to this guy, you'll notice that there is no pressure tube. That's because the higher PSI that's rushing through the spray guns is going to create a vacuum effect, and it's going to draw the solution or your finish to your fluid passages. This particular one is a gravity feed spray gun, so you'd probably see a little pinhole at the top of the cup. And then the siphon feed spray guns, you'd also notice a pinhole at the top of the one-quart cup assembly. In the event you're using tougher coatings like the multi-fleck coatings that really need that additional push with a compressor spray gun, you can actually convert most spray guns to become pressurized. Most of the mid-range, I should say. That's correct, yeah. So an HVLP gun, I mean, this one in particular would be around 25 PSI. Also this one, you can find HVLP spray guns at a variety of different CFM. This one would be a higher consumption spray gun. It'd be probably around 15 CFM, but you generally will find them around 7 to 10, and some are moving towards 4 to 6 CFM, which is really great to see. What that means is you don't need a gigantic shop compressor. You can use a more reasonably sized compressor to actually allow for air without draining it and having it trying to keep up every single time. Next we have the fan pattern.
Does that mean with the higher PSI you have more of a bounce back?
That's correct, yeah, because you're just firing at it harder. Now if you're using lower viscosity coatings, then you're going to have more of a problem, but for paints or primers, that'll actually be a benefit, the higher pressures. Sorry, do you want to repeat that for me, sir?
The higher the PSI, does that mean you get more bounce back?
Yeah, so higher the PSI, does that translate to more bounce back? The answer would be yeah. And that's where we go back to that high pressure technology, which was sort of the original compressor-driven technology, where we had that 40% transfer efficiency. It's because we were firing so much of it into the atmosphere. Whereas this right here, we have to maintain that 65% transfer efficiency to be HVLP compliant.
But you couldn't run this at a lower, I mean, you could just adjust the pressure down to 10.
If you want to, yeah.
Would this work at 10? You said normally runs at 25.
It would depend on the viscosity of coating and sort of the expectations of, do you want to go across your cabin like that, or do you want to increase your speed of your pass and allow for more to come out there? But you can also, you can lower it, definitely. You can also increase the PSI, but when you start doing that, you also want to consult your manuals and just the build of the gun. Some guns may have a max PSI of 90, so you don't want to start playing around too much with that. And then if you go into the pressurized cups, which we had mentioned, some of those cups also have a PSI restriction, so we don't want to feed too much air. Yeah, sorry, sir.
What kind of spray gun you suggest for water-based or waterborne?
Water-based or waterborne? That's a good question. If you want to, we can chat about that at the very end, but pretty well any sort of technology we're going to be talking about today will be good for waterborne finishes. Yeah, and we can sort of discuss whether gravity or siphon would be better, and then the air caps as well. Okay, so then we have our fan pattern control. So like I said, they're either found here, at the back here, and on the higher end spray guns, you'll find them right up there. Similar to the HVLP turbine-driven spray guns, you'll notice that all the way forward will restrict the air, all the way back will open that up and allow for a larger pattern. And then the ones that are right back here will generally have a dial to help assist if you're going for the min fan pattern or the max fan pattern. Next, we have our air cap and fluid nozzle selection. I won't spend too much time on this because, once again, very similar to the HVLP turbine-driven counterpart. Multitude of different air cap sets. Now, with compressor spray guns, we get calls a lot at Fuji from the turbine side where they say, what's the best cup style for you? And like, is gravity better than bottom feed? Which is better? Turbine technology, I personally say it's personal preference. If you're new to spraying, we can generally tailor a gun that's going to be better for you. So, for instance, if I was spraying with if I was going to be doing a tabletop or kitchen countertops that were laid out horizontally, me personally, I would go with a gravity feed spray gun because that way the cup is up top. Whereas with siphon feed spray guns, the cup would be the lowest part of the spray gun, or the cup would be the lowest part of the spray gun. So if you lose focus when you're spraying, and I've done this many, many times, you'll probably hit the surface and you might actually scuff some of your finish. So on the flip side, if you're going to be spraying a wall like this and you don't want to be constantly refilling the cup, then obviously the one-quart cup assembly of a bottom feed spray gun would be more conducive to what you're trying to do. But what I wanted to get at is because we don't pressurize the cups with these compressor spray guns, the needle nozzle selection can actually be dependent on the orientation of your cup. And that's because the venturi or the vacuum effect has to do a little bit more. So for instance, gravity, we're already using the principle of gravity to force material into the cup. So you might be able to spray a particular finish with, let's say, a 1.3 millimeter air cap set. Whereas if you were using a non-pressurized siphon cup, which would be right down here, because you're going up and down, sort of up a pickup tube, there's a lot more fluid passage and a lot more room for that finish to travel. And thus, you'll likely need a larger size air cap set just to allow for more fluid to pass out of there. Finally, we have the needle and fluid control, which is also back there. One thing I didn't touch on is right in front of these triggers is what's referred to as a needle packing nut. What that does is there's a needle packing nut and a needle packing. The needle packing nut compresses the packing seal, and what that'll do is allow for the tension of the needle or it increases or decreases the tension on the needle. If it's too loose, you'll actually receive a drip out of the front here. And if it's too tight, it's actually not going to reseat with the fluid nozzle at the front of the spray gun, and you're going to start getting little sort of drips coming out of the top there. Next, we can go into the trigger. Self-explanatory. It's a two-stage trigger as well. The reason you're not going to have a bleeder-style spray gun off a compressor is the second you hook it up, it's just going to obviously empty your compressor. So, and then finally, we have our air inlet, which would be right down there. Much smaller than the HVLP turbine-driven spray guns. And that's because we're using higher pressures instead of the lower pressures at higher volumes. And so the final part is the air source. So you always have your spray gun and your air source. So right here, it's an air compressor. This is probably, I don't know, a 30 or 40 gallon compressor. For most of the high CFM spray guns, you will need something like this or larger. For the lower CFM spray guns, you can get away with the smaller compressors, not as necessarily small as the pancake compressors. Those you'll probably be starving the spray gun quite a bit. Next, you have your air regulator. So what this does is it's allow you regulating your air from the compressor. And typically, you'll also find a regulator on here as well. And then the other part you'll see on most units is, this is generally mounted to the wall. This is a oil or moisture separator. So, turbine-driven technology, we got our vacuum motor. We're just recycling the air. With this, we're going to be compressing the ambient air and then delivering it through an air hose. So if you got moisture in your shop, high humidity, if you got dirt in your shop, that at least will trap it before it actually enters the airstream and goes to your spray gun. Because if you're starting to use compressor-driven spray guns, but you're introducing oil and moisture to your coatings, obviously it's just a recipe for disaster. The one thing that's not included here would be the air hose that would supply the air from the compressor to the spray gun. Okay. So now we can sort of touch on some of the pros and cons of these particular units here. So one thing we have to factor in for tailoring it to your needs is the cost of the actual system. So as I had mentioned, single-stage units, the handheld units, they're a more attractive price point. They could be between $50 and upwards of, let's say, $300, depending on the quality that you're looking for. Also, you can look at some of the inexpensive spray guns that we had mentioned, the inexpensive HVLP spray guns like Harbor Freight. It's a fantastic spray gun to get started with, I always say. Some people talk to me and they say, you know, it's a cheaper spray gun, but the beauty of those sorts of spray guns is that's the first step from getting from your brush and your roller or your rag to a spray system. If you're new to spraying, people don't necessarily want to just drop $400, $500, upwards of $1,500 on a spray system, so this is sort of a middle ground. Also, there's the initial cost, but then there's the cost of upkeep too. So with turbine technology, it's pretty inexpensive. There's not too much to go wrong with the turbine other than keeping your filters clean. The cost associated with compressor technology up front is a little bit more expensive just because you need the compressor, you need the lines, the moisture and oil separators. Generally, you're going to need maybe some sort of outside help from an electrician if you need to ground things, and also feeding it into a spray booth if that's a route you're going to be taking. One of the other things we can talk about is portability. Obviously, with one of those larger compressor systems, you're not going to be dragging that onto your job site. So if portability is something that you're looking for, the single stage, the multi-stage, the handheld units would be more conducive to that sort of environment. If you got your gigantic shop setting and you got a dedicated spray booth and a drying rack and all that, then compressor-driven technology would likely be more suited for what you're trying to do there. Next, we have the noise level. Will noise level be a factor for you? So once again, if you're in a shop and you're surrounded by a multitude of tools, generally the sound of your system isn't going to play too much of a role in your decision. Whereas if you're using it on site, we have a lot of people that use these systems for refinishing bathtubs in hotels and apartments. But the person next door is a tenant, so you need these systems to run quite quiet. Then that's where noise level would definitely play a role there. Ease of use. If you're new to spraying, you don't want the most complex system ever. You probably want something that you can just plug and play. Read a quick user manual to get a better understanding of how to use the system. If you're a more intermediate sprayer and you understand the nuances and the ins and outs of spraying, then compressor spray guns or multi-stage turbines with the boost of a compressor, which we'll chat about later on, would probably be more beneficial for what you're trying to do there. Next, we have the temperature. So, in my experience, compressors deliver colder air. HVLP turbines deliver warmer air. So depending on the coatings that you're going to use, that may be a benefit or a con. For instance, lacquers. If you're spraying lacquer with an HVLP turbine, because of the hot amount of air, it can cause those lacquers to flash off before hitting your surface. So what you might find yourself doing is you're spraying, it flashes off, your subsequent pass, you're actually going to be locking in that grit, and you're always going to have this sort of sandpapery finish. What you can do there is you can move a little bit closer to the spray piece or increase your fluid, and that'll allow for a wetter coat to go on. But definitely your air source the air source temperature is something to consider depending on what you're looking to do. Ambient air doesn't really play too much of a role. I mean, you don't want to stick a turbine in the middle of the desert and think it's going to operate forever. So that's also one other thing there. Now, bear with me just a second here. Okay. So, tailoring to your needs. At the company I work for, which is Fuji Spray, this is sort of your list that you'll go down, your checklist as someone calls in. They'll say a multitude of different things, and what you want to understand is, A, what materials you're going to be spraying, what substrates, not necessarily the species of wood, but if you're going to be spraying metal, if you're going to be spraying wood, you're spraying plastics, so like automotive. What type of budget you have. This is sometimes a little bit of a sensitive question, but just trying to make sure that you're fitting something into their budget, something that they're not going to be. A lot of people want to save money, but if you can grow someone into a system and they're comfortable doing that, then generally you can increase the budget there on for most parts. So after that, we have the frequency. So how frequently will you be using the spray system? Turbine-driven motors, they're a brush motor. So it's not a type of system that you're going to come in the morning at 8 a.m., turn it on, do your finishing, and at 4 p.m. you're going to turn it off. That's really going to exhaust the lifespan of the turbine. Also, I wouldn't necessarily say that single or multi-stage turbine units, or handheld units for that matter, have the sole responsibility of a production shop. They should be used almost as like a complementary system. You wouldn't use, if you're doing, let's say, 20 kitchens a day or 20 kitchens a week, turbine-driven technology may be a little bit starved after a while. You might want to look at compressor technology. Is sound a factor? So this pertains to going back to those HVLP turbines. There's newer technology now that will allow for quieter operating levels, which is great if you're doing on-site finishing. We have one customer who he's actually able to increase the charge of his kitchen cabinet refinishing because of the fact that he doesn't need the whole entire house to be cleared out, and that's because the sound levels are low and he exhausts properly out of the house there. Oh, sorry. Do you require the ability to control the speed and power of your equipment? So handheld units, the single stage, and some of the multi-stage units, you will have the control for the speed and the power of your equipment through that air control valve that we were talking about. But if you do really need to control the speed and power of your equipment, I'd look at the variable speed control on turbine technology, or looking at a compressor where you can adjust your inlet pressure depending on what you're doing, how high the viscosity of the material you're spraying is, or how fast you want to get the job done. And yeah, so what I was touching on with the budget aspect is, do you typically purchase for the now or for the later? Some people are okay with purchasing multiple systems. Some people, and these are the best customers I find, is they'll come up to you and they say, what's the best one? I want it. I love those customers. Not everyone's like that. So I like to say, is this something that you want to grow into? Or are you, so let's say someone comes up and says, I'm going to be spraying a polyurethane. Then you can probably curtail a specific system to them, but if they're not too sure if they're going to be going from dyes to polys to paints to multi-fleck coatings, then you do want to mention the later. So mention the benefits of the different stage systems, the higher operating pressures of some of the compressor technologies, and once again, that can really allow for people to move that budget closer to the end zone there. Now what I want to, oh, went the wrong way there. Okay. So now we're going to do some of the case studies that I had mentioned where, now these aren't actual customers, I'll be completely transparent. These are scripted Fuji employees that have pretended to call into my voicemail. What we're going to do is we're going to listen to sort of the ins and outs of their particular scenario and then get an understanding of what might be the best equipment for them. Some of these scenarios might be specific to yourself, so definitely take notes. Let's start with the first one. And it's going to be a gentleman by the name of Stefan.
Hey Jim, my name is Stefan, and I'm a middle school teacher, and I'm finally looking to get into spraying. I'd be using the sprayer to complete small woodworking projects when I have time on the weekends, which is very little. I want to use it once a weekend, but realistically I know I'll maybe get into it once a month. In terms of budget, I don't want to spend $1,000, but I also want to buy once. I'm okay with growing into a system as opposed to having to buy again or upgrade.
Okay, so Stefan here, he sounds like he is definitely a novice to spraying. This is a customer that we deal with a lot. People that are moving away from the brush and the roller and the rag and moving into spraying. So he said he was a hobbyist, he's new to spraying. He's using it for small personal woodworking projects around the home. Doesn't sound like he's going to be selling them, so generally can move to some of the more expensive units because it's not going to be used for production. He said he's got the possibility of using it, I believe he said once a week, but with his schedule, he'll probably get to it once a month. So it's going to be light usage. He did seem budget conscious. He gave us a bit of a range. What I like to hear is, though, he's comfortable growing into the equipment. So he doesn't want to buy for the now, he wants to buy for the later on. Said his budget was between $500 to $800. Does anyone want to throw out a guess of a particular recommendation of what you might steer Stefan towards? No? No volunteers? Okay. So I would say that a 2 or 3 stage HVLP turbine would probably be best for what he's looking to do. The single stage units, he mentioned he wanted to buy once. So these ones are definitely ones that he can grow into. These are great for personal projects, woodworking projects. These units are really good for spraying your clear finishes. So anything from like the evaporative finishes like an alcohol-based shellac to a waterborne or solvent-based polyurethane or even lacquers. So these are great little systems for this. A system like this, you could get away with spraying paints, which these units are quite common for. What you'll notice with the lower stage units is you'll probably have to dilute your paint much more than the higher stage units. Your speed of application will be slightly slower than the higher stage units. And then you have less of you would have to increase your dilution levels. The Mini-Mite 3, whenever someone asks what's the best spray system for them, it's one thing to give different types of technologies, but because we've narrowed down the technology to be turbine-driven, I'd like to give Stefan some ranges. So this particular unit would be your entry-level one, would be great for what he's doing, and would be something that he can grow into. However, these units, this might be more of like a contractor-grade system. So if maybe teaching doesn't work out for him and his woodworking business takes off, at least this way he's not going to be shorted or anything like that. Another recommendation that I would give is one of the inexpensive HVLP compressor spray guns. The reason for this is because sometimes you can get 3 or 4 of these for about $30. That once again makes me a lot more comfortable than having to drop $400 or $500 right off the bat on a spray system. So I would even say to my good friend Stefan here, I'd say before even purchasing anything like this, look at something like this if you do have like a brad nailer or a small compressor, just to test it out, not to actually finish the piece, just to get familiar with the different controls. Another thing that people don't realize you can do, and there are the pros and cons of it, but you can also rent HVLP turbine equipment, or most equipment in general, from your big box stores. Obviously, just depends on how well it's cleaned before it was given back, so that's one thing to consider, but not necessarily having to pull the trigger on a more expensive unit like this, which would fall into that $500 to $800 price range that he was looking for. But maybe he would like to just get his feet wet with something like this. The next case study is a gentleman by the name of Mike from Dublin, Ireland. These units, equivalent units, you would probably find this one retailing from maybe $300 to $500, whereas this one you might be stepping up to the $600 to $750 range. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is you recommend the bottle on top rather than the underneath.
That's just my personal preference. Yeah. So
The reason is,
the reason would be so that that gravity feed spray gun is the lowest part of the gun would be the air cap and the fluid nozzle. So if I'm going to be spraying something like this, that way I can get as close as I want to or as far away as I want to without any worry. Whereas with the bottom feed spray guns there, the cup is actually going to be the lowest part of the spray gun. So as I make my pass, if I lose focus, which I do all the time, I'm probably going to hit my piece, and I may actually put a little scuff in the actual finish.
sanded down a lot.
I do a lot of sanding,
This
yeah.
would be for lacquer spraying on.
Yeah, you can use it for lacquer. You could be using it for wide range of coatings. Yeah. What would be the depending factor on that if you wanted to spray, lacquer or whatever the case may be, would be what we talked about, that air cap set, that needle nozzle that passes through the spray gun. A 1.0 would likely restrict most of your clear lacquers, or especially the pigmented lacquers. So you'd probably find yourself between like a 1.3 millimeter tip or a 1.5, and that's just a larger orifice at the tip there. Yeah. Okay, so this is our good friend Mike. So let's see what Mike has to say.
Hi Jim, my name is Mike. I'm calling from Mike's Wood Stuff. I'm actually the owner of the company. I design and create fine furniture pieces for clients and have been using a big box store brand sprayer for almost all my projects. I'm ready to step into the big leagues and move away from the plastic units. Currently have a single stage unit, but I've been having trouble atomizing some materials like waterborne paints. I find I have to thin way too much. I typically finish 7 to 10 pieces per month with the odd kitchen thrown into the mix. I'm a 2-person shop and all our spraying will be done in our recently constructed spray booth. But don't tell our insurance company that. In terms of budget, I want to buy right, but I'd also like some different options of what works for my application now and what I should consider for the future. I don't want to say money is not a concern, but I would be able to comfortably dedicate $1,500 to $2,000 on this equipment setup.
Okay, so our good friend Mike. Mike, he mentioned he is the owner of Mike's Wood Stuff, the least creative name for a wood shop. Looks like it's a small to medium-sized business. He's the designer and builder of fine furniture for clients, so this would be something that he's going to be using to make money. It's a production shop, sounds like. He's currently using an inexpensive sprayer. It sounds like he might be using that handheld blue unit that we had referenced before. He's using it to spray waterborne paints, and he's concerned with over-thinning. He said he's thinning way too much, so let's assume it's probably between 40 and 50%, which is quite high when you're factoring in waterborne paints. It sounds like he's got moderate to high usage. He's got quite a few pieces that he's doing, and then if you factor in when that kitchen job gets thrown into the mix, he will have quite a bit of work to do. He's a 2-person shop, so we do want to start considering noise level, because if you're working on something and your friend or your colleague's working on something else, you might be protected, but he might not be. He has a spray booth. That was in yellow for a reason, because you may have seen something where he was talking about his insurance company. I don't know how the legislation works locally here, but in Ontario, it is pretty strict. Insurance companies will raise the rates on your insurance when you start having a dedicated spray booth. Even if you say waterborne coatings, especially in Ontario, solvent base is absolutely out of the question unless you have a truly professional production booth with multiple air changes. So although he said he had a spray booth, and that's where I would initially go compressor, this might be something that he wants to store away and tear down. He did mention he has a budget about $1,500 to $2,000, so we can start moving him into the higher stage systems. Let's see what the recommendation would be. So right here, we're saying the 3 to 5 stage HVLP systems. So this guy would operate at 6.5, got 9.0 and 9.5 PSI. These would be great for spraying waterborne paints with minimal dilution. Something like this guy, the 6.5 PSI, you might find yourself in a range of, let's say, 15 to 20%. The 4 stage and the 5 stage units, you could find yourself between 5 to 10% dilution. With my experience with HVLP technology, and I'm sure everyone else is here, especially with turbines, you will be required to dilute your finish to effectively atomize it. A lot of people ask, can I just spray it right out of the can? No, it's not really going to work well. It can only work well in certain cases. For instance, and I'm not trying to plug any products here, but like a Behr paints is tough to spray. It's quite thick, so you'll find yourself on the larger range of that dilution, whereas something like a PPG breakthrough, that's a higher end coating, it's a lower viscosity. I have seen people with the correct settings and the correct air cap sets and a little bit of finesse, they can spray it undiluted quite successfully.
So how do you decide what's the right amount of dilution?
So with compressor technology, I would reference the TDS sheet, the MSDS sheet on what the manufacturer says is the allowable range of dilution, or if there is a tolerance level. Just because they generally have almost like a recipe of what you'd want to follow. HVLP turbine-driven technology, there's a little bit more of a finesse factor, you could say. Typically with your systems, you're going to get a viscosity cup, which will allow you to measure your viscosity. Most HVLP turbine manufacturers will also add in a quick reference guide. So that way you can sort of ascertain, if my paint run-out time through my number 4 forward viscosity cup is around 80 seconds and the allowable spray range is between 37 to 50, then I will have to start diluting my paint. Now, how to just figure out what's that magical number of dilution? There is a little bit of trial and error. That's why I always have a recipe book with me. The second I will write down like the ambient temperature of the room, the run-out time, every single bit of information I can, so that when I go to replicate that, I can just pull it out and go. If you're going to start thinning something that you're unfamiliar with, I would start at whatever the manufacturer's recommendation would be, let's say 6 to 10% typically. And then if your viscosity is still outside of that range, increase in 5% increments. And that's typically good.
Specifically, what you're looking for there, though, is just proper atomization.
Correct, yeah. Which would mean, fine particles even on the outside of the pattern, even coverage, not starving the spray gun. Things with lacquer, for instance, too, is not allowing it to flash off before hitting the actual surface. So next we have a lady by the name of Yolanda who's going to discuss her particular case here. And if I recall, she's more of an amateur novice sprayer.
Hi, Jim. My name is Yolanda. I have a passion for refurbishing older furniture pieces. So far, I've only used paint with brushes, but with a sprayer, I'd like to start applying clear coats for protection. I want something that's easy to use so both my children and I can work together on furniture pieces. We will be tackling some projects over the summer break with the kids for the kids' room. My budget is approximately $150. I don't mind buying twice as many systems if required. My kids are probably going to lose a couple pieces, but I want something that's going to take me from a brush to a sprayer.
Okay, so Yolanda is my ideal customer. Regardless of her budget, what she's trying to do is she's trying to increase her knowledge in finishing. She's going from the brush and the roller, and she wants to get into spraying, which is music to my ears. So she mentioned she has a passion for refurbishing old furniture. She's probably one of those people that is driving down the street, sees an antique piece and wants to refinish it, maybe with some milk paint, some chalk paint, a little bit of distressing. Whether she resells it or not, that seems to be the route she's going. She's mentioned she's absolutely new to spraying. She currently uses paint, but with a sprayer, she wants to move into clear coats, which is fantastic. Now she can start protecting her pieces. She wants something that's easy to use. She mentioned that she's going to be having her kids involved. Compressor-driven technology would likely not be the ideal method there, especially when factoring in she's looking at only spending about $150. She did mention light usage in the summer. She's got kids. Kids might lose some of the pieces of the equipment, understandable. So we probably want to price her or push her towards a lower-end unit. So let's see what the recommendation for Yolanda would be. Fantastic. So it'd be a handheld or a single-stage HVLP unit would be probably best for what she's looking to do. Very, very easy to use. It's plug and play for this one. Same as this one. The only additional thing would be the air hose here, which would attach the gun to the turbine. Very, very simple to use. A lot of entry-level systems, too, will have incredible user manuals because they're trying to gear it towards the beginner. So they will really help you find that dilution or that viscosity level that you're looking for with the accurate expectations of what you're trying to finish. Let's move on to the fourth. So we got 5 case studies in total. Let's move on to the fourth one, which is a gentleman by the name of Trevor.
Hi, my name is Trevor, and I work for JB Cabinetry, and I'm an on-site refinisher and work primarily with commercial and residential cabinetry, like kitchen, bathrooms, any cabinet you can imagine. I also take on other projects when on site, like banisters, staircases, and the odd countertop, depending on what they desire. I've been doing this for close to 30 years now, and I'm not getting any younger or better looking. I am noticing some hearing loss from using the loud turbine unit from the 80s, as well as an underpowered pancake compressor I have kicking around. I've started wearing PPE for hearing, but it leads to challenges as my partner and I now have difficulty communicating on site. I also don't want to disturb the neighbors when we are on site at apartment buildings or commercial office where meetings are taking place. The only negative feedback we receive from the commercial jobs is that noise is very disruptive. The company I work for has told me that I have to do my own research, and they have budgeted me about $800 to $1,000. I'm sure I can push it to $1,500 if I can prove to head office the benefits of spending more.
Okay, so to start off, Trevor sounds like he's a seasoned professional. He is an on-site refinisher for a commercial cabinetry company. Versatility, so he works on a variety of different projects. He did mention he does cabinetry, he does some countertops. He'll work on banisters. Sounds like he probably does staircases and spindles as well. So something that has a little bit more versatility would be right up his alley. He did mention that he's been struggling with a little bit of hearing loss. And he's been also struggling with the use of PPE because the communication level between him and, let's say, his apprentice or his coworker is starting to be strained. He did mention portability, or he didn't mention portability is key, but being an on-site refinisher, you don't want to lug around a gigantic compressor all day. You would want to use something that's a little bit more lightweight and conducive to that environment there. I like a guy like Trevor. He mentioned that he's got about $800 to $1,000 to spend. Unfortunately, his company makes him do all the research, so this is where we want to help him tailor what's best for him. And if we can push him to it, it sounds like if we explain some of these benefits, we might be able to get him into that $1,500 price range. So for that reason, what I would be looking at for him is either a 4 or 5 stage turbine. And on this one, there's also going to be an additional recommendation. This particular unit, very small, very lightweight, very portable, would be great for what he's looking to do. Then you'll notice the footprint size is much different on this particular unit. And this is common regardless of the brand of technology, but something like this likely has some sort of sound suppression in that system. This typically means no use of PPE. You can definitely get by without that if you keep the turbine in the correct distance, which is about 20 to 25 feet away from where you're spraying. And then it'll also allow for better communication with your coworker. Units like this too, you can also utilize wireless remotes, and some of the manufacturers of turbine units are also coming out with a technology that when you engage the trigger, the turbine will automatically pop on. So stuff like that's very cool. But it'll also help with the extending the brush life of the motor, and also with the turbine running, communication is hard, so when you can shut it off when possible, obviously you can increase the levels of communication for you. Something like this, you'd probably be 60 to 62 decibels away, or 60 to 62 decibels at about 15 to 20 feet away. Something like this really ranges in the, because it's a metal case, it will be a little bit louder. This one is too, but the deafening foam inserts really helps with that. But something like this, you'd probably have it around 1.5 horse to a 2 horsepower shotback. So let's say between 80 and 95 decibels. So definitely a louder system.
So 80, 90 decibels, and the other one was
60, 62.
Okay, so like a 30 decibel.
Yeah. So 62 for real world comparison would be average conversation.
Is there something they could do, like a suppression box, to put that one in and even cut it down another 20 dB?
It's possible. The one thing you got to realize too is imagine these are your lungs. So when you start restricting it, it's almost like putting over your face. So I have seen people do it. What they usually do is it's not like a full enclosure. So they'll do maybe all sides but the back just to allow for air to actually keep feeding into the turbine. And so the additional recommendation, these are some things that that are available on the market today that are great accessories. These right here are remote pressure pots. You'll typically see these with compressor-driven technology, whether it's a 2-quart or a 2.5-gallon pressure pot. Compressor goes into the pot, and then from the pot you got your air and fluid line, and that'll allow you to spray. What's cool about these guys is these can solely operate off of a turbine on its own. So because you can use higher stage turbines like the ones referenced here, 4 or 5, you're hovering in between 9 to 10 psi, you have that additional push to utilize a pressure pot. So benefits of using a pressure pot, what you're doing is you're removing the material cut from the spray gun, so it's going to be a lighter spray gun, but you're also allowing yourself to now spray at any angle. although the siphon cups for spray guns have that pressure tube, it's not enough pressure to actually keep the fluid from, sorry, let me start that from the beginning there. So if you have a bottom feed spray gun and you're spraying like this, because you have a pressure tube, you only have a specific range of motion, because if you get the paint into that pickup tube, you're probably going to clog up some check valves here, or you might actually backflow into the air passages of the spray gun. So with this, you don't run into that problem. You can spray at any angle, including upside down. Nice thing about this too is you can have some increased material savings. At the end of the day, you can just clear the line, and for the most part, depending on the finish, you can just store it in that pot, and when you're ready to start spraying again, you'll probably just have to flick a little booger off the front of the nozzle there and hit the trigger, and you'll be good to go.
Did you say these normally are used with compressor technology?
Yeah, well, historically you would have seen them with compressor technology, but with the advancements of the turbines, now you only need a turbine to run this, so no large compressor. Compressor, yeah. You'll just notice that the air connections are slightly smaller to match up with that. And then you got this little guy. So this is it sort of utilizes the same methods of like an airbrush with the triggers on the top. This is a touch-up spray gun. So he did mention he's doing banisters. He's probably doing some stairs. He's doing spindles. Well, you can restrict the flow of or you can restrict your pattern quite well with one of these spray guns. This one you could probably get into about 1 inch to 1/4 inch diameter. So if you were to do toning on a banister, I know a lot of people who are luthiers will use this to do like the sunburst effect on guitars. That's quite common. So these touch-up spray guns are great. Now, typically they are bleeder spray guns, so air is constantly going to be rushing through them when you turn that turbine on. And they do have a sort of pressure tube assembly there, so you do want to be mindful of the fill level and the orientation of your cup.
Does that run with a compressor or with a...
This particular guy right here would be off of a turbine, but you'll find a wide variety of airbrushes for compressors, and even touch-up spray guns like this too. All it is just adjusting the inlet size there. And then after, so there's one, we can touch on this now actually, just to address it, which is, we mentioned that the range of motion on, the range of motion on these guns, you can only go past a certain axis before you start clogging your pressure tubes. There's cups on the market today that are liner cup systems. So imagine it's, instead of filling the material directly into the cup, you're filling it into an internal liner, like a formula bottle for a baby. So that means you can also spray at any angle because your paint's never coming into contact with your pressure tubes. Instead of pressurizing the cup, you're just pressurizing that liner. So those are great features. You'll see these from companies like 3M, the 3M PPS cup system. One of the original, I don't want to go all the way back, but there was a unit, that Graco one that I had. They also have a liner cup system too that will draw the finish up and allow you to spray at any angle. Any questions on the pressure pot setups, touch-up spray guns? No? Yep.
Is there any downside to the pressure? Or what are the downsides to using a pressure pot?
There really wouldn't be. I mean, the one thing you have to factor in is that is going to be filled with material. So if you don't backflow into the cup and store it there, you're probably going to be wasting some of that. So at the end of the day, what you'd want to do is if you can take even like a small little air output on a compressor and just sort of backflow that into the turbine, that would be your best bet. I think people will also, I typically don't do it, but you can also take a rag, pop it over there, hit the gun, and that'll backflow the finish into your pressure pot. Yeah.
Have you seen those little sprayers? They're a siphon sprayer that uses a mason jar to hold material, I think it's called.
The critter.
A critter.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of those?
I mean, it all depends on it's accurate expectations. So for instance, like someone like Yolanda, that would be fantastic for her. Let's just get her feet wet, let's try it. But someone like a Trevor or a Mike, they're more production style. The critter wouldn't really keep up. It's a great system though. Like I said, anything that gets people from brushing and rolling to spraying, I think it's great.
I make a bunch of small little things.
Yeah.
And I just find that, and I have a gun with the pot on the butt.
Mm-hmm.
I just find that
It is, yeah, yeah.
I'm wondering what would be a good, but I like using a turbine, I don't like hooking up to my compressor.
What you can also look at is, so something like this is about 250 cc's, so that would be about 8 ounces, I think. So this can actually be retrofitted onto your bottom feed spray gun, so you have a much smaller cup capacity. Yeah, and that would be better for sort of the bowls that you had mentioned you were doing.
It seems like a big plus of the pressure pot is because you don't have that can hanging out there.
Exactly.
Much more maneuverable.
Much more, yeah.
That's very appealing.
Yeah. So if you're doing a bookcase, you need to get into some of the innards there. Also with that quart cup, you're going to be, even with the gravity cups, you're going to be fighting to get in there. So this is definitely more conducive to that sort of spraying.
Store your finish in there at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, it's all dependent on the type of finish too, so you want to look at the pot life, but like I wouldn't put a 2-component finish in there and just let it go, but I have a pressure pot at home that's just absolutely full with shellac, 24/7, 365. Yeah. Don't tell my boss that because he'll lose his mind. Yes, sir, in the back.
I've had one of the Critter units for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
For lighter finishes and non-critical finishes like shellac or primers, primers are kind of heavy, but
Mm-hmm.
they work really well for shellac especially.
Yeah.
And the other advantage they have is they're cheap and they're really easy to clean.
Right, right.
And the regular ones are pretty short, they only got one moving part.
Was that, sorry?
Only got one moving part.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, give it a try. It works pretty good with the smaller stuff.
Yeah, yeah. That's the critter you were chatting about, correct?
Non-critical type finishes, I wouldn't use it for conversion or for poly or anything like that.
Right, right. Maybe some staining, some toning.
They'd be good for like an alcohol-based dye stain or
Yeah.
something like that, because you can usually consume the pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about a lacquer? You might have to thin it down a little bit, but you could shoot lots with it.
Mm-hmm. And I believe Lee Valley is they currently sell the critter. It's about maybe,
Sale on Amazon too.
that's true. I think it's
I
about,
just bought one of those.
mm-hmm.
And I've made some modifications to it. I added a pressure regulator on the bottom of it so that I don't have to keep running back to my compressor to
Mhm.
change the pressure.
Yeah.
And I also changed out the bottle from a 16-ounce, a pint mason jar to an 8-ounce.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's right on there.
Yeah.
So it's even smaller than the
Oh, it's perfect, yeah. Much lighter weight too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The only
good.
thing I need now is some kind of holder, because with the regulator on it,
Yeah,
there's no way to sit it down.
right, right, yeah. So let's keep moving on here. The final case study we have is a lady by the name of Daniela. So let's see what Miss Daniela has to say today.
Hi Jim, it's Daniela calling from DTE Event Rentals. I'm the operation manager here. I currently manage a team of 8 finishers with 3 spray booths. We refinish event furniture for any event you can imagine. We spray pigment and clear lacquer, conversion, varnish, and in some rare cases we spray waterborne paints. We have a total of 6 multi-stage turbines that we circulate through the shop. We usually get a good 3 to 5 years of each turbine before replacing the unit or having the motor serviced. The units are kept in a separate area from spraying and debris. We also clean the turbine and the turbine filters frequently using compressed air. I really stay on top of the team to make sure they take care of their equipment. Our current units retail around $1,300. Considering we would like to replace 3 complete units, as well as 3 additional spray guns, we would be budgeting for around $3,000 to $5,000.
Daniela is my favorite customer. She's willing to buy turbines at the wazoo. When they fail, she buys a new one. Fantastic. Now, as someone who's trying to educate her on to better her experience, for me to keep feeding her turbines, that's not fair at all. One thing that I highlighted in yellow too is she says that she's very, very vigorous on making sure that her people keep those turbines clean. How does she do it? She cleans it out with compressed air. So right away we know she's got compressed air on site. So let's ask her about that. Let's ask her about the size of the compressor, the consumption level. If it's too small, maybe we can use some of that $3,000 to $5,000 budget and push it towards a bigger size compressor so that she can utilize it for finishing. Now, at the same time, I've encountered a lot of people that are okay with just getting the motor serviced, the brushes replaced, or if the turbine is completely kaput, they'll just keep circulating new ones in. So she, getting back, she did mention she's a shop owner of an event rental company, so they're constantly changing the colors of their finishes and they're constantly refinishing their furniture. Definitely a production shop setting. She's got a lot of refinishers on site. She's got 8, and she's got 3 separate spray booths. In my experience, if you're in a production shop and you have a spray booth, turbine technology isn't necessarily the most conducive to, because you're running that 25-foot hose in there, whereas most spray booths have inline outlets and inlets and outlets for compressor hoses to come in without having to crack a door or run some conduit in there. She has a nice budget, so $3,000 to $5,000, a lot of room to play there. She's the shop owner, operations manager, I believe she said. So this is the mover and shaker. This is the person we definitely want to talk to. And so what I would recommend is, if she wants to stick with the turbines, all the power to you. Keep going. If she wants to try something new with HVLP compressor-driven technology, that's my personal recommendation. I'd hate to see her have to keep spending money every 3 years. So let's just get a couple of these spray guns. The mid-range to high-range spray guns could be between $200 and $700. So she was mentioning, I believe she said 3 systems plus 3 guns. So that'll definitely keep her under her budget there. And then an additional recommendation would be different types of pressure pots as well, because this definitely does sound like production. This little guy right here would be your 2-quart pressure pot. This particular one is for turbine technology. There is one set up for compressor-driven technology. This bad boy right here would be a 2.5 gallon. That's almost exclusively for compressors.
What's the difference in the price of those two?
Difference of the price, this one you'd probably, my experience, maybe $200, $300. This one you'd be up in the $400 or $500 range.
Because it seems that with that one, you could even keep all of your different finishes in them.
Mm-hmm.
And then just, like store them like paint cans and go with them like that.
You could do that. I would recommend that more for like the liner cup systems, because you can actually pop the cup off, cap it, store it, write the date, the time, and whenever you're ready, just fire it back in there. So these would be particular recommendations for Miss Daniela. Yeah.
Liner cups, you mean you can take the liner cups out, or they stay in the pot?
Yeah, so because it's actually on the gun, you'd simply just like quarter turn. The cup would come out, and you would take a little red or black cap that comes with the gun, or comes with the cup, and you just cap it. Yeah. Is that my cue to leave, or okay? Jeez. So let's open it up to questions and conversation right now. AWFS says, let's do some key takeaways. Hopefully you guys were able to jot them down. I like to just throw in some quotes. So for the things you have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Aristotle, pretty straightforward. This is a great one. A year from now, you may wish you had started today. If you haven't tried spraying, please just pull the trigger and do it. This one also is very much like number 2. Don't wait. Time will never be just right. It's never going to be feeling right to do it. Just do it. And then my favorite one, which is Stephen Wright, is if at first you don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you. And so that concludes the presentation. Let's open it up to questions. One of the resources I want you guys to take from this too, another takeaway, is please take all my information. That's direct extensions, that's everything. I don't care if it's a Fuji, I don't care if it's a turbine, a compressor. It could be a competitor's airless technology. My goal is just to get you guys comfortable and doing good work.
I admit I don't know what I'm doing, and that normally doesn't bother me.
Perfect.
But I don't know how to fix what I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm getting runs, or I'm getting orange peel, or those things. I try to guess. Does Fuji offer classes?
We do. Actually, I shouldn't just say Fuji, but a lot of manufacturers will. Ours are in Toronto, beautiful Toronto, Ontario, so if you want to come up, feel free. And those are, we could do beginner courses, advanced courses, anything from just dialing in the spray gun to, toning your own shellacs with, amber dyes and that sort of thing. So why don't we maybe chat after? Where are you out of, actually? Where are you based in?
Arizona.
And even there's a lot of like local woodworking guilds that companies like ours will like to work with just to familiarize yourself with spraying. So we can definitely look at that. Anything else? Yeah.
If you were to spray this room, how much would you have to double the furniture, and how much would you have to mask off?
If I was spraying a room like this, I would typically go with airless, just because you get the how many gallons of paint you want. You put your pickup tube in there and you can start spraying. With airless technology, though, you're going to have slightly lower transfer efficiency rates, which means more overspray and bounce back. Something like that, I would probably drop cloth to the floor. If you were using HVLP turbine, then it would take you, what might take you 3 hours with an airless would take you maybe 6 to 8 with a turbine, just because you're refilling and it's a slower speed of application. But you'd probably be, when you're doing spots around here, your drop cloth would maybe have to be an open newspaper. But as you get up there, obviously you're going to have more overspray falling down. So to answer your question, I would say the length of a drop cloth would be fair, but airless would certainly be more beneficial to what you'd be trying to do. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I didn't quite follow, you were saying that you're using a compressor system versus a turbine system, and you might use a different needle size for the same material because of...
Yes, yeah.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
I didn't quite follow.
No problem. Let me see if I can actually quickly go back here. So I had mentioned HVLP turbine technology. It operates at lower PSI. So what we need to do, let's go here. So what we need to do is we need to take, let's say it's 10 PSI coming out of that. We are going to need to take approximately 10% of that to pressurize the cup. So we're always going to have a constant flow of material, regardless of if it's gravity or bottom feed. When you get into the compressor spray guns, because you're not pressurizing the cup, you're only using either the method of gravity and the Venturi effect, or with siphon, the true Venturi effect, then the air cap set size will depend on the orientation of the cup. So material is going to flow much easier with this, so you can generally get a smaller tip because you already have that push there. Now this is probably fractional, obviously. Something with siphon, there's a lot more fluid passages, a lot more room for this thing to go. It's also not using the principle of gravity to just force it down, it's got to go up. So for that reason, you would want a larger air cap set just to ensure you got a proper air to flow ratio and you're not starving your fluid stream. Yeah.
So that you look for it is if you're starving.
Yeah. And once again, the TDS or MDS sheets on most coatings will be able to at least give you a starting point to ascertain which air cap set. And typically they'll give you ranges of, let's say, a 1.2 to a 1.5 or that sort of thing. Now they generally don't reference HVLP turbine technology, but that's where you can just, got my contact info, you give me a call and we'll get you set up with the right stuff there. Any,
Hi, my name is...
oh, sorry. Yeah? Yes. It gets pretty hot. If you're running it for, let's say, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I'm not going to shut it off and go grab the brass connection on the hose and start turning it off. Usually you're going to want to wait about 15 minutes or so. Now the heat doesn't necessarily translate all the way to the spray gun. It's more just at the air source. Now there are some more finicky coatings like the lacquers where they will flash off because of that heat. But sometimes the waterborne coatings like paints will actually benefit from that because the warm, dry air allows them to cure a little bit faster. Yeah. Any further questions, anyone? So what I'd like to invite you guys, if you'd like to come down to booth 4271, you can chat with myself, any of my colleagues, pick our brains. We also have a virtual spray simulator. It's not a big video game, it is very much educational. So what you do is you put on this virtual reality goggles, you pick up your spray gun, you step into your spray booth, and you can actually begin spraying panels. So instead of tackling a chair, you can actually do it in virtual reality, map out the speed of your pass, the fluid settings, the fan settings. You can dial in the viscosity on the computer, and what this allows you to do is to be a little bit more comfortable. But one thing.
So that's getting, the simulators are getting great. I was over at a bandsaw the other day, and I was able to cut off my fingers.
And they fly off. There you go.
Well, but it was like, but it was,
Yeah.
put a big no.
Yeah, there you go.
But no, but I really, the cost of the simulator is so much less than
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, for coming out. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.